Galnet News Digest Review of the Year 3307. The biggest news stories of 3307 were Salvation and the NMLA. The Federation had its share of stories too. The events surrounding the disappearance of Starship One were finally explained. The CEO of Core Dynamics attempted to take over the Federation, and a poorly thought out piece of legislation threatened to tear the Federation apart. As 3307 began, Fleet Admiral Vincent stood trial for his part in the sabotage of Starship One and the attempted assassination of Federal President Jasmina Halsey back in May 3301. He'd been implicated by naval technician Rory Webster, who admitted tampering with the ship's hyperdrive, but who in a plea bargain named Vincent as the person who ordered the work. Vincent, a close personal friend of the then Shadow President Zachary Hudson, had been suspected of undermining President Halsey in 3300 and earlier in 3301 by getting her involved in unwinnable conflicts over Onion Head. Former President Halsey, the intended assassination target and who lost her position as Federal President to Hudson while she was missing, presumed dead, returned from the Alliance to Mars for the trial and gave evidence against Vincent. Her evidence and financial records she presented showed that Vincent had accepted massive bribes from military ship manufacturer Core Dynamics to remove Halsey from office. The joint motive appears to have been that Halsey had been planning defence cuts that would have hit both the Federal fleet and the company that builds the ships. In particular, Core Dynamics CEO Jupiter Rochester was implicated in the scandal. As part of the Rochester dynasty, that includes his mother Isolde, who is Congressman for Altair, and Federal Ambassador to the Empire, Jordan, Rochester comes from one of the most influential families in the Federation. Vincent was found guilty, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Rochester, whom some conspiracy theorists believe was part of a club that manipulates galactic events to suit their own purposes, would no doubt have been arrested and faced trial too, but he escaped before Federal agents could act. Rochester didn't just run away from justice. He took some of his best engineers from Core Dynamics with him to permit-locked HIT 54530, where he began setting up an operation that planned to replace the democratic government of the Federation with a corporate-run model, with himself as the supreme executive. In early February, the Federal Intelligence Agency sent forces to HIT 54530 to arrest Rochester. He was duly taken into custody and on the 5th of March was given a summary sentence of solitary life imprisonment by the Federal Justice Department, to the surprise of the Federal Attorney's Office, which would have preferred the facts of the case, including details of any co-conspirators, to become public. Conspiracy theorists have suggested that Rochester was silenced to prevent him implicating Hudson or other members of his alleged club. The Jupiter Division, without Rochester at its head, made an attempt to take over the Sautach system in June, but was defeated a second and final time. The corporatist movement is presumed defunct. A consequence of the Vincent Trial and the corporatist wars was that Lakon Spaceways, which was on the verge of being taken over by Core Dynamics, was able to retain its independence with Alliance financial assistance. It relocated to Alioth shortly after. Despite the deep humiliation experienced by the Rochester family, the congressman and the ambassador retained their jobs. One-time Federal President Halsey accepted a role as Federal Ambassador to the Alliance. She also retracted her New Age remarks about the caretakers of our galaxy that she made in April 3302, shortly after being released from 8 months floating in an escape pod, federal ambassadors are not expected to do drugs. President Hudson, who gained the presidency as a result of the assassination attempt, escaped without being implicated in the scandal, and remains president. Following the NMLA 9 Martyrs bombing that killed his predecessor Brad Mitchell, the new federal Vice President Jerome Archer took extreme action to try to prevent future terrorist attacks within federal space. He introduced the Domestic Counter-Terrorism Act, which created the legal framework for the new Proactive Detection Bureau of the Federal Intelligence Agency to intercept and read every communication with at least one party inside federal space, and to arrest people who are judged by the automated monitoring software to be planning to commit a crime. Despite a need for greater security, the potential impact on civil liberties caused disquiet in some circles, with Shadow President Felicia Winters providing a rallying point for those who opposed the act. Rumours of students getting arrested for researching federal politics and history online did little to improve perceptions. Archer hailed increased arrest rates as proof of the act's effectiveness, while opponents noted that it was finding enemies in the Federation that didn't exist, and simultaneously completely failing to help track down the NMLA. A number of disaffected factions chose to leave the Federation as a result of the privacy implications of the Proactive Detection Bureau. There were also allegations that the PDB was treating secessionists, those who wanted their factions to leave the Federation, as criminals, and was having them arrested. The Federation later stepped up the pressure by actively, and entirely unsuccessfully, waging war on several of the factions that wanted to leave. Hudson and Archer had another prize in their sights. Former Federal Admiral Yuri Grom. Delta Pavonis, which had previously been a federal system and which is now independent, had invited Grom and the Federation to discuss possible assistance that they might be able to offer the system. During diplomatic talks, a team of soldiers working directly for Hudson attempted to arrest Grom, whom the Federation regards as a traitor. The move plunged the system into a brief war, at the end of which Yuri Grom was free and the federal megaship had been taken over by the EG Union. The Federation's own diplomatic corps roundly condemned Hudson's actions. In the light of this fiasco, Hudson must have been delighted when several thousand domestic terrorists were conveniently discovered by the PDB during the course of the following week. It transpired that these were remnants of the Jupiter Division corporatist movement and may have posed an actual threat to the Federation. Demands for the repeal of the Domestic Counter-Terrorism Act continue, but it's no longer seen as a reason for factions to leave the Federation. To a large degree, the federal populace have become used to being snooped on, and the actual arrest of a small number of actual terrorists may have swung the balance of opinion towards retaining the PDB, for now at least.